We are going to start talking about muscle tissue now. The advantage being when I say muscle, everybody knows what we're talking about. Muscle cells, however, can propagate or transmit an electrical impulse, and we're going to look a lot at this in a lot more detail. It's also called an action potential. In fact, that is what it's called medically. And in addition to this, muscle cells have the very unique ability to contract and change their tension and, in some cases, change their length. This is, of course, how we're able to move. All movement is because of muscles. This also is responsible for you being able to sit upright. Your posture is because you have muscles, uh, mainly along your spinal cord, your core, that maintain a state of partial contraction to allow you to be upright when you choose to be. Muscles also produce heat. This is normally just a metabolic byprocess. But when you're cold, your brain takes over the control of muscles that you normally have voluntary control over and makes them contract involuntarily. We call that shivering. And that heat production is used to counteract the dropping temperature of your body. And finally, something that you probably don't spend a lot of time thinking about, but your muscles maintain openings. And it does this to a special type of muscle called a sphincter. The reason that you don't just urinate whenever your bladder begins to fill is because it's under control of a sphincter. And interestingly enough, since humans are predaceous, animals that prey upon other animals have voluntary control over their urinary sphincter. Animals that are prey animals do not. So, like a cow or a rabbit cannot be housebroken. You can't teach them when to urinate and when not to. You can't tell your rabbit, hold it until I let you outside, for example, because they don't have voluntary control over that. Now, animals that prey upon other animals have to have voluntary control. So, dogs and cats, and us, for example, have voluntary control. And that's because you can't be sneaking up on an animal and lose control of your bladder. Not only will it make a noise, but it would produce a smell that would give you away, make it impossible for you to prey. So, if you're ever wondering, just one of the many reasons that you can point to that say humans are designed to eat meat, and there's a lot more in the digestive tract, but that would certainly be one. Okay, we use muscles for injections. There's different kinds of injections. There's IV, which is intravenous, IP, which is intraperitoneal, sub-Q, and IM. If you have gotten a vaccination, you probably got it into a muscle. You get prompt absorption compared to subcutaneous, but not so rapid as IV, where it's put directly into the circulatory system. We want to hold it in one spot long enough for your immune system to migrate to that area and generate a response. And what you want to do is to repeat this and ensure that you generate memory cells of the lymphocytes. And we'll talk a whole lot more about that in AP2. Okay, so there are three different types of muscle. If I just ask you to start naming muscles, and besides the heart, every muscle that you named would be a skeletal muscle. These are called voluntary muscles because you have voluntary control over them. So this would be your pectoralis major, your biceps, your triceps, your gluteus maximus, your deltoids, your abdominal uh, rectus, for example. All of these muscles that have these names are skeletal muscles. And if we looked at them under the microscope, they all have some things in common. They have these lines through them called striations, and we'll talk more about those. And they're multinucleated, and the nuclei are on the outside or the periphery of the cell membrane. This would be like a single muscle cell. Then there's cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is, of course, found in the heart. These types of muscles are branched. They're also striated. They're multinucleated. And at the ends, they have something called an intercalated disc. This intercalated disc is a combination of desmosomes for a very, very tight connection and gap junctions to allow very rapid transfer of ions, because when we want a heart chamber to contract, we want it to contract all at once. We want that rapid propagation of the impulse. So that would be a single cardiac cell. And then finally, we have smooth muscle. This is probably the one that you know the least about, but the one that in part two, other than when we cover the heart itself, that we will spend the most time talking about. Smooth muscle is involuntary, and it's under the control of the autonomic nervous system. Now, we're going to talk about that when we get to the nervous system. But when you hear autonomic, just think automatic. This is something that's under the control of your brain that happens automatically. You don't even have to think about it. It just does it. Where do we find the smooth muscle? Well, we found it around tubes. And every single organ system of the body has these tubes, which is why we will talk about it so much in part two, because that's when we're really going through the organ systems. But say digestive system, well, that's just one big long tube. The esophagus is a tube. The tube gets bigger, we call it the stomach. It gets smaller, we call it the small intestine. It gets bigger, we call it the large intestine. And then finally, we've got the rectum. One long tube, all of which has smooth muscle around it. Pick another one, respiratory system. Okay, your trachea, your windpipe, and your bronchioles. They have smooth muscle around them. Those are tubes. Your cardiovascular system, those arteries, surrounded by smooth muscle. Because it's a tube. Arteries are tubes. Reproductive system. Women, you've got fallopian what? Tubes, right. The male counterpart of that is something called the vas deferens. So all of these tubes throughout the body are under the control of the autonomic system. Also, hollow organs, for example, the stomach, are surrounded by smooth muscle, and again, under control of the autonomic system. And it kind of makes sense that this would be under autonomic control. For example, we all know that we can eat right before we go to bed, and while you are asleep, that food will move right through your digestive tract. So in other words, not only do you not have to voluntarily do it, you don't even have to be awake for it. This is just something that's automatically done for you by your autonomic nervous system. And the smooth muscle is what is going to be used to make all of this movement possible, whether it's a contraction or just concerted movement. That is all possible because of smooth muscle. Smooth muscle contractions take longer than, or last longer than skeletal muscles. Now that's important too. Skeletal muscles, sometimes you need a very quick reaction. If you are, let's say, a baseball player, and somebody's throwing a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, you only have a few milliseconds to pick it up and decide if you want to swing. But once you decide, then you've got to not only initiate the movement of the bat, but put the bat where you want the bat to be. If you are into mixed martial arts or anything like that, it is very important that you be able to strike quickly. And as a former practitioner, I can tell you that it's equally, if not more important, that you get that back. My instructor used to always say, if you kick, get your leg back faster than when you put it out. Because you don't want to, it's called hanging a leg if you do that, because you can get swept or you can get it trapped, or many bad things can happen if you just leave something out. And as far as punching goes, there's a lot of times where when you punch, you actually expose yourself because you're using an appendage that you could block with as part of your strike. So skeletal muscle, we need very fast reaction time. Smooth muscle, again, under autonomic control, think about it. A lot of times we want to squeeze and kind of, keep that going. Speed's not that important when it comes to moving food through your digestive tract. Think of it like that. Also, muscle typically responds to acetylcholine. That's what that ACH is. I know you don't know what that is yet, but we're going to talk about that when we do muscles. But it also responds to norepinephrine. This would be noradrenaline. Something that you're going to release for emergency situations. What these look like, this is a single cell, this is a single cell. These are actually two cells that I put together to kind of give you an idea of how they fold over the top of each other. It's called a spindle shape. There's only one nuclei in these cells, and they have a limited ability for cell division. Now, skeletal muscle has a much better ability. Cardiac muscle does not have any ability at all. If you lose heart muscle, it's gone. It cannot replicate, unfortunately for us, and that's what makes cardiomyopathy so dangerous. Because when you lose part of your heart and the cells actually die, they are gone. They also do not have any striations in them, and so for lab purposes, if you were asked to differentiate between the tissues, the striations are a dead giveaway for the smooth muscle because they're the only muscle type that doesn't have them. Okay, let's take a look now at the gross anatomy of a muscle if we were just going to look at it. And remember, gross anatomy means something that you can see with the unaided eye. You can just look at it and see it.